My children called me worthless. They didn't just say it, they made it a game. At family dinners, my opinions were laughed at. My ideas were mocked. My years of sacrifice, my late nights worrying over them, every bedtime story, every scraped knee I kissed better, they meant nothing. I remember the exact moment I realized how little I mattered to them. I was standing in my own kitchen, and my daughter smirked. "Mom, why don't you just stay out of our lives? You're useless anyway." I froze. The knife I was holding trembled in my hand, not from fear, but from something deeper. Rage? Heartbreak? Something that combined into a bitter cocktail that settled in my chest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to disappear. And yet, I also wanted something else. Something quiet, deliberate. Revenge. My name is Eleanor, though most people now call me Grandma. I'm 82 years old. I've lived through loss, betrayal, and heartbreak. But I've also seen resilience rise from despair. My story begins not in luxury, not in privilege, but in a modest house filled with memories, some bitter, some sweet. I was widowed young. My husband, Gerald, died when our children were small, leaving me to navigate the world alone. He was the love of my life, the anchor in my storm, and without him, I learned to be strong in ways I never imagined. I took jobs, managed the household, and gave my children everything I could, even when my body ached and my spirit screamed for rest. I did it all with love. I did it all quietly, hoping that one day my sacrifices would be noticed, appreciated, reciprocated. But life has a cruel way of teaching you that love and effort are not always returned. My children, whom I nurtured and adored, grew into people who treated me as a burden. My daughter, the eldest, sharp-tongued and clever, never missed a chance to cut me down. My son, charming in public but selfish behind closed doors, learned early that manipulation got him what he wanted. My youngest, sweet, soft-spoken, but swayed easily by the others, always following the path laid out by greed and arrogance. We had family dinners every Sunday. That was the tradition Gerald insisted on. And for years, I clung to it, believing it would keep our family close, believing my presence mattered. But over time, these dinners became arenas of humiliation. The laughter around the table wasn't warm. It was sharp, pointed at me. They whispered jokes about my age, my appearance, my supposed uselessness. One night, my son leaned back in his chair, smirking, and said, "Mom, why don't you just retire already? You're clearly slowing us down." I smiled politely. Inside, I was crushed. I bit my tongue and reminded myself, anger is a tool, not a weakness. Every laugh, every snide remark, every dismissive glance was a brick added to the wall I was slowly building. Not around them, around me. A fortress of patience, of silence, of planning. My neighbor, Mrs. Watkins, often dropped by with her gossip and unsolicited advice. She noticed the tension too. "They don't respect you," she said once, fussing over my hair as I stirred tea. "You've given them everything, and yet they act like you're invisible." I nodded, letting the words settle in. Painful, yes, but revealing. It was true. I was invisible to the people I loved most. And sometimes, invisibility is a curse, but sometimes it is a secret weapon. The cracks started small. My suggestions were ignored. My calls for help were brushed off. But gradually, the cracks widened. Invitations I sent went unanswered. My birthday passed without acknowledgement. And the final straw? They began to make decisions about my property, my finances, as if I didn't exist. I remember the day I realized just how far the betrayal ran. I had been quietly managing my small investments, a secret inherited nest egg from Gerald's parents, who had quietly trusted me with a modest fortune. I hadn't said a word because I wanted them to earn their own way, because I wanted to teach them the value of hard work. I wasn't expecting gratitude. I wasn't expecting acknowledgement. I was expecting respect. And respect was something I would have to earn in a way they could never imagine. Life continued outwardly ordinary. I hosted the weekly dinners. I smiled when my children mocked me. I poured tea, cut the roast, and kept my voice light, my words neutral. But behind the kitchen door, behind the polite smiles and stiff nods, a storm was forming. Every insult they hurled, every eye roll, every smirk, I cataloged them. I remembered them. Each one etched into my memory. Every humiliation became a lesson. Every betrayal became a clue. The house, which had once felt like a sanctuary, became my war room. My study, filled with old photos and letters, became a map of their weaknesses. Old letters revealed secrets they thought I didn't know. Conversations I overheard became strategies, and slowly, quietly, I began to plan. Even on the worst days, I found solace in small joys. A walk in the garden, tending the roses Gerald had planted. Afternoon tea with Mrs. Watkins, who listened without judgment. A good book at night, reading by the soft light of the lamp while the house was empty, the air thick with unspoken tension. I learned patience again. I learned to wait. I learned that sometimes the quietest people are the most dangerous when underestimated. And then, one day, the turning point arrived. It wasn't violent. It wasn't dramatic in the usual sense. It was simple, like a letter slipped under my door, like a whisper in a crowded room. The lawyer from Gerald's old firm had called, asking to meet about my late husband's estate. A small inheritance, nothing extravagant, yet enough to make my children's heads spin if they knew the truth. I smiled when I heard the news. My heart pounded. This was the moment, the opportunity I had been waiting for. But even then, I didn't act hastily. I listened. I planned. I imagined their faces when the truth was revealed. Their arrogance would be their downfall. Their cruelty would be repaid, not with meanness, not with rash action, but with precision, with poetic justice. I could feel the weight of years lifting, the first stirrings of empowerment filling the hollow left by betrayal. And yet, I knew this was only the beginning, the calm before the storm. The opening scene in a story they would never forget. Because what they didn't know, what no one knew, was that I had been quietly preparing for this moment my entire life. Every slight, every insult, every dismissive glance had been logged, stored, and studied. I had a plan. And when the day came, when the lawyer finally read the will aloud, their faces would freeze. But what I discovered next changed everything. I thought I had seen the worst. I thought their cruelty had a limit. I was wrong. It started with small things, missed calls, forgotten birthdays, but quickly escalated. My daughter, Lisa, began inviting friends over without telling me, treating my home like a hotel she didn't own. One evening, she came in, eyes rolling, dropping her bag on the table. "Mom, seriously," she said, tossing a crumpled receipt toward me. "Why do you even bother cooking? We can just order." "You're too slow anyway." I froze. I wanted to shout. I wanted to throw that receipt back at her. But I didn't. I just smiled, quietly, hiding the sting behind a calm nod. It kept getting worse. My son, Daniel, had started borrowing money from me without asking. First, it was small amounts, $10, $20. But soon he was emptying my checking account, claiming he had bills, emergencies, excuses I should have seen through. I did see through them. Every lie he told was a reflection of his arrogance, of his entitlement. One night, I confronted him. The kitchen smelled of burnt toast, the clock ticking loudly in the tension-filled silence. "Daniel," I said, my voice steady but sharp, "where is the money I lent you last month?" He shrugged, leaning back in his chair like I was the nuisance. "Oh, that? I had to pay some bills. You wouldn't understand." "I'm sure I would," I said, trying to keep my anger from boiling over. "You've been taking money from me for months now. I trusted you." His smirk was the cruelest betrayal. "Mom, don't be dramatic. It's not like I'm taking from strangers. You're family." Family. That word felt hollow. It had been hollow for a long time. And then came the real humiliation, the phone call that shattered my heart. I was at the grocery store picking through vegetables when the line rang. It was my lawyer. "Eleanor," he said, voice hesitant, careful. "I need you to know. Your children have tried to contest the estate. They're claiming you're unfit to manage the funds, that you should be bypassed entirely." I dropped the basket. Carrots rolled across the linoleum like fallen soldiers in my private war. "What?" I asked, disbelief choking me. "They can't do that. Those funds are mine. My husband left them to me, not them." "They're persistent," he said. "They've hired a lawyer. They're arguing incompetence." I felt a hollow ache deep in my chest. Betrayal had a sound, a taste, and a weight. This was it. They were trying to erase me, to make me vanish from the life I had built, from the legacy I had earned. When I hung up, I could hear the faint laughter of children in my memory, the voices of Lisa and Daniel, smug and cruel, growing louder with each passing day. They had become monsters, the ones I had raised with care. It didn't stop there. At dinner, Lisa made a spectacle of herself, raising her glass as if to toast. "To Mom," she said with a sneer. "The woman who thinks she's worth more than she is." My fingers tightened around my fork. I could feel my knuckles whitening. I wanted to shout. I wanted to throw the plate. But I didn't. Not yet. Not until the right moment. "Lisa," I said quietly, almost sweetly, "careful what you wish for." She laughed, a sharp, cruel laugh. "Oh, Mom, you wouldn't dare." I let her believe it. I let them all believe it. Daniel joined in, leaning back in his chair, swirling his wine. "Honestly, Mom, why are you still here? You've done your time. Retire already. Let us handle things. We know better." Better. They thought they were better than me. They thought they could dismiss me, humiliate me, erase me from my own home. And the worst part? They weren't subtle anymore. They began sneaking into my study, rifling through my papers. I caught Daniel one afternoon, standing there, guiltless, holding a document like it was a trophy. "Mom," he said, flashing that infuriating smirk. "What's this? Investment records? Oh, you've been hiding money from us? How quaint." I stared at him, not a word leaving my lips. Inside, I was boiling. Betrayal isn't just words. It's actions. It's sneaking, lying, stealing. And these were my children. The lies kept piling up. Every conversation with neighbors revealed whispers about my incompetence. "Have you heard," one neighbor said, "that Mrs. Eleanor can't even handle her finances? Her children are worried about her?" I nodded politely, hiding the fire inside. "Thank you for letting me know," I said, and smiled. The smile was sharp, controlled, hiding the plotting that had begun. One night, I came home to find my cherished heirlooms gone, pieces I had inherited from my mother and grandmother. Jewelry, silverware, photographs, all gone. Lisa had taken them while I was at the market. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply sat in the dark, the empty frames and velvet boxes around me like ghosts of my dignity. And I remembered every word, every laugh, every snide comment, every useless remark. I realized then something chilling. Betrayal isn't just a moment, it's a pattern. And once the pattern is clear, the next move must be deliberate, precise, unyielding. I started documenting everything: dates, conversations, actions. Every betrayal became a thread in the tapestry of their arrogance and cruelty. Every insult, every stolen heirloom, every sneer was a puzzle piece I would use later. Even as I cooked, cleaned, smiled through their insults, my mind raced. Every meal, every dinner, every small gathering was a rehearsal. I watched their expressions, their overconfidence, their hubris. They had no idea I was paying attention. They didn't know that the quiet, frail woman they mocked was learning their weaknesses, storing them away for the perfect moment. One evening, Daniel, in a particularly cruel mood, leaned in close and whispered, "You're so fragile, Mom. So old. We should just be honest. You're done. Finished. We're taking over everything. You're irrelevant." I looked at him, my eyes calm, steady, a smile brushing my lips. "You have no idea," I said softly. "You really have no idea." It was true. They didn't know. They thought this was the end of me, that I was broken, that I would sit in my corner, humiliated, defeated. But they were wrong. Every betrayal, every lie, every cruel word was shaping me, molding me into something stronger, sharper, unstoppable. And that was the terrifying part. They still couldn't see it coming. I hit rock bottom one rainy evening. The sky was slate gray, and the wind rattled the windows like it was warning me. I sat alone in my dimly lit kitchen, the floor sticky with spilled tea I hadn't even noticed. My children had left hours ago, laughing as they went, joking about how Mom can't handle the house anymore. I stared at the empty room, the silence pressing down on me like a weight. Every insult, every betrayal, every stolen dollar and heirloom came rushing back. The ache in my chest wasn't just sadness. It was rage, humiliation, grief, and fear all intertwined. For the first time in years, I let myself break. I curled into the chair, hands covering my face, and whispered, "What did I do wrong? Why did I fail them?" Tears came, unbidden. I hadn't allowed myself to cry in years, not in front of them, not in front of anyone. And yet now, the tears fell freely. They burned, but they were cleansing too. I allowed myself this moment of weakness because I knew, after this, nothing would ever be the same. It was then that I noticed the letter. It had been slipped under the door earlier, and in my despair, I had ignored it. I unfolded it slowly, almost hesitantly. The envelope was thick, official, stamped with the firm of Gerald's old lawyer. "Eleanor," it read, "you are the sole trustee of an inheritance left to you by the late Mr. Whitmore. Certain conditions apply and legal obligations must be fulfilled. I urge you to contact our office at your earliest convenience." My hands shook. Mr. Whitmore had been Gerald's distant cousin, someone I barely knew, someone who had quietly trusted me with a small fortune decades ago. I had never touched it, never mentioned it. I had always planned to leave it untouched for my children, before they proved themselves undeserving. I felt a spark, a tiny, glimmering spark of hope, a plan forming. But it was fragile, tentative. I wasn't ready to act yet. I needed guidance. I needed allies. That's when Mrs. Watkins appeared at my door, as if she had sensed my despair. She carried a tray of cookies and a concerned look, but her eyes quickly narrowed when she saw my face. "You've been crying." she said softly, placing a hand on my shoulder. Tell me what happened. I hesitated, then let the words spill. I told her everything, the mockery, the theft, the lies, the threats against my inheritance. She listened without interruption, nodding, her face tight with concern. Oh, Eleanor, she said finally. They've underestimated you. Badly. You've been patient, quiet, careful. And now it's your turn. Her words ignited something in me I hadn't felt in years. Not just hope, but a cold, sharp clarity. Revenge. Not impulsive, not violent, but precise, clever, poetic. Justice served in a way they would never see coming. I began to gather information, carefully, methodically. Old letters, bank statements, photographs, documents. Every small betrayal, every lie, every sneer was logged. My children had left a trail. Unintentional, but unmistakable. Their arrogance, their greed, their overconfidence, it was all there. One evening, as I sifted through old boxes, I stumbled upon a stack of documents Gerald had kept. Property deeds, wills, investments. A plan began to form in my mind. These documents revealed loopholes, trusts, contingencies that I had barely understood before. But now, with years of observation and a mind sharpened by betrayal, I saw them clearly. I could turn their own assumptions against them. Every insult they had hurled, every theft, every attempt to undermine me, they had done it with such confidence, with such arrogance, that they never imagined I was capable of fighting back. They believed they had won, and that was my advantage. The suspense built as I began reaching out quietly. Contacts I had long ignored. A lawyer I had once trusted, a financial advisor, even Mr. Whitmore's firm. I inquired about options, trusts, contingencies. Every conversation was delicate, every word measured. I was walking a tightrope, and one wrong step could expose my plan prematurely. Night after night, I reviewed my notes, cross-referenced documents, and rehearsed scenarios in my mind. I imagined Lisa's smug smile freezing, Daniel's arrogance crumbling, the youngest's wide-eyed shock. I visualized the dinner table, the lawyer reading aloud the will, the room silent except for their disbelief. And yet, I didn't rush. I waited. Patience was my weapon. I had spent decades teaching my children the importance of control, of timing. Now, I would apply that lesson to them. I also discovered another secret. While rifling through Daniel's old emails on an old shared computer, he thought I didn't notice. I found proof of his lies, his manipulations, even attempts to hide his debts and misuse family funds. Evidence. Perfect, undeniable evidence. I smiled. The puzzle pieces were falling into place. Each betrayal, each humiliation, each stolen dollar. It was all part of the larger picture. And now, I had the means to exact justice in the most satisfying way imaginable. There was fear, of course. I am not naive. I knew the risk of exposing myself too soon, but there was also exhilaration, a thrill that coursed through my veins like electricity. For the first time in years, I felt alive, not merely surviving, but plotting, anticipating, strategizing. Mrs. Watkins became my confidant and co-conspirator in small ways. She helped me double-check details, reminded me to stay calm, and offered insight into my children's personalities. Never underestimate a mother scorned, she said one evening, handing me a cup of tea. They think you're weak. That's your advantage. Use it wisely. And so, the plan took shape. Slowly, carefully, I began constructing the sequence of events that would lead to their downfall. But at this point, it was all invisible to them. They were blissfully ignorant, laughing at me behind my back, counting on my weakness. I knew the turning point had come. I was no longer the humiliated, powerless grandmother sitting in the shadows. I was a strategist, a silent force, and soon, very soon, the moment would arrive when all the betrayal, all the cruelty, would come crashing down around them. But before that, I had to prepare, to wait, to ensure that when the moment arrived, it would be perfect. Every detail calculated, every reaction anticipated, every face frozen with shock and disbelief. And so, in the quiet of my study, surrounded by the tools of planning, documents, notes, and memories, I made a vow. Not out of anger, not out of malice, but out of justice. They called me worthless, I whispered to myself. And soon, they will see the truth. They will see everything. The day finally arrived. I had waited years for it without even realizing it. Years of ridicule, humiliation, and betrayal had honed me into someone patient, meticulous, and deliberate. I had everything I needed: documents, evidence, and most importantly, timing. I invited the family over under the pretense of a family gathering to discuss a minor matter of the estate. They arrived smug, confident, their arrogance practically dripping from their smiles. They had no idea what was coming. Lisa walked in first, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "I hope you didn't forget this time, Mom," she said, smirking. "We wouldn't want another dinner disaster." Daniel followed, leaning against the doorway, wine in hand, radiating self-assuredness. "Honestly, Mom, this is a waste of my afternoon. Let's just get through it." I smiled, calm, composed, polite, the perfect mask. "Thank you for coming," I said softly, as if nothing had happened. "I wanted us to have a conversation about important matters." The lawyer arrived shortly after, tall, authoritative, and serious. He carried a thick folder, which he set on the table with a deliberate weight. I watched my children exchange glances, confusion flickering across their faces. "Mom," Daniel said, raising an eyebrow, "what's this about?" "Patience," I said, my voice steady. "Everything will be revealed shortly." The lawyer began reading. At first, it was mundane. General instructions, small bequests, routine clauses. My children listened, growing impatient. Lisa checked her phone. Daniel leaned back in his chair, muttering under his breath. I watched them, savoring every moment of their arrogance. Then the bombshell. "Under the terms of the will," the lawyer said, "all assets previously believed to be accessible to your children have been designated as follows: 50% donated to charity in the names of various community foundations your mother has supported, and 50% held in trust for individuals who have demonstrated loyalty, care, and respect toward Mrs. Eleanor." I kept my face serene as their expressions froze. Lisa's jaw dropped. Daniel's wine glass wobbled in his hand. The youngest looked like he'd seen a ghost. What do you mean?" Daniel stammered. The money, it's mine, isn't it?" The lawyer raised an eyebrow, professional, impartial. "No, it is not. These decisions were made by Mrs. Eleanor in consultation with legal advisors and are fully binding. Any attempts to challenge them will be unsuccessful." I felt a rush of satisfaction that I hadn't allowed myself to feel in decades. Every insult, every stolen heirloom, every laugh they had shared at my expense was finally paying off. Lisa's voice trembled, a mix of anger and disbelief. "Mom, you can't. This isn't fair. We raised you. We're your children." I leaned back, calm, almost amused. "Children," I said softly. "Sometimes the people closest to you are the cruelest. You made your choices." They sputtered, argued, pleaded, But the lawyer remained unmoved, citing every legal clause I had painstakingly secured. Every detail of the plan had been calculated. They couldn't wiggle, couldn't escape, couldn't manipulate their way out. Lisa suddenly turned red, fury flashing in her eyes. You've humiliated us. I smiled faintly. I think you've humiliated yourselves. Daniel, desperate, grabbed the folder, flipping through pages. Mom, this is absurd. You've done this to us on purpose. Yes, I said. Yes, I have. Every slight, every insult, every useless remark you made over the years, it all led to this moment. You underestimated me, as you always did. And that was your mistake. The youngest one finally spoke, voice small, almost terrified. Mom, we didn't know. I shook my head. You should have known. Respect is earned, not demanded, and cruelty always comes back to you. The room was silent for a long moment. They were stunned, faces pale, eyes wide, mouths open. I had never seen them like this, not even as children. The smugness, the arrogance, the sense of entitlement, it was gone, vanished. And in its place was disbelief, regret, humiliation. I looked around the table and felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Power, real power. Not over their finances, but over the narrative of my life. I had been the victim for too long, the one laughed at, dismissed, erased. Now I was the orchestrator, the one in control. The lawyer continued, reading details of the charitable bequests and the trust arrangements. Each clause was precise, each decision poetic in its justice. The items they had stolen, the heirlooms they had taken, were referenced, returned, or compensated. Every act of greed had been anticipated and neutralized. I watched Daniel's face turn red, then pale, then red again. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He couldn't argue, couldn't manipulate, couldn't fight his way out. His children's smirk, that practiced expression of superiority, had no place here. Lisa, usually sharp-tongued and cutting, sat frozen. Her mind raced, trying to find a loophole. A flaw, but there was none. My careful planning, my patience, my decades of observation had created an unassailable fortress. And in that moment, I felt the full weight of poetic justice. They had mocked me, called me worthless, stolen from me, lied to me, tried to erase me. And now, they were powerless. I took a slow breath, savoring it, letting it fill me with warmth. Revenge doesn't have to be cruel, doesn't have to involve malice. Sometimes the quiet, deliberate, clever plan is the most satisfying of all. And this, watching them face the consequences of their arrogance, was perfection. Lisa finally whispered, almost choking, Mom, why? I smiled, serene, almost gentle. Because, my dear, you forgot one thing. You forgot that a woman who has been underestimated her entire life learns patience. She learns observation. She learns timing. And eventually, she learns justice. Daniel sank into his chair, silence filling the room. He had nothing left to say. No words could undo the humiliation. No argument could reverse the consequences. I had outsmarted them, outmaneuvered them, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly free. The lawyer closed the folder. That concludes the reading of the will, he said. I suggest you all take some time to reflect on what has been revealed. I nodded politely. Thank you, I said, and as they left the room, shoulders slumped, faces pale, I felt the years of burden lift from me. It wasn't just money or property or heirlooms. It was respect. It was recognition. It was finally being seen, not as useless, not as weak, but as someone capable, someone wise, someone deserving. And as I watched them walk away, humbled and defeated, I whispered quietly to myself, almost as if speaking to the empty room. They called me worthless, and now they know the truth. After that day, the house felt different, lighter, freed from the weight of laughter that had once cut me to the bone, freed from the whispers, the eye rolls, the endless attempts to erase me. For decades, I had lived in shadows cast by my own children, people who should have cherished me, loved me, respected me. And now, the shadows were gone. I spent the first morning after the will reading in the garden. The roses Gerald had planted years ago bloomed in bright defiance, petals reaching toward the sun as if celebrating my victory. I ran my fingers along the soft edges of the flowers, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to smile without reservation. Not the careful, polite smile I had worn around my children. This was real, pure, whole. Neighbors started noticing the change, too. Mrs. Watkins came by, carrying her usual basket of cookies, but there was awe in her eyes. "Eleanor," she said, leaning on the gate, You look different, like you've shed years of worry." I laughed softly, a sound I hadn't heard in a long time. "I have," I said. "Years of worry, humiliation, and feeling invisible, they're gone. Finally gone." The community, too, seemed to respond. Word of the will had traveled quietly, respectfully, and the whispers that reached me weren't cruel anymore. They were filled with admiration. People began calling, sending letters, even inviting me to local events I had never attended. The woman they had called worthless was suddenly seen as formidable, wise, dignified. It wasn't just respect. It was freedom. Freedom from the people who had tried to control me. Freedom from the invisible chains of expectation and derision. Freedom from being trapped in their petty world. I could finally live for myself and not for anyone else. My children, of course, had their own reactions. Lisa avoided my calls for weeks, unable to face the humiliation. Daniel tried a few times to reach me, offering half-hearted apologies and excuses, but I had learned long ago that words without sincerity were meaningless. And the youngest? Lost in confusion, a mix of fear and regret etched across their features. I didn't answer any of them. Not because I was cruel, but because I no longer owed them my attention. They had spent years mocking me, undermining me, dismissing me as useless, and now the tables had turned. They had learned what I already knew. Respect must be earned, and cruelty always carries consequences. Even in solitude, I felt whole. I rearranged the house, filling it with objects that brought me joy rather than reminders of betrayal. A new reading nook by the window, soft cushions, a stack of my favorite novels. Afternoon tea was no longer a routine chore. It was a ritual of self-respect, a moment to savor. I began taking long walks again, through parks and along quiet streets, breathing in the freedom I had earned. People greeted me differently now, smiles, nods, genuine warmth. I felt alive, vibrant, and unexpectedly young. Age no longer mattered, nor did the past insults. What mattered was that I had reclaimed my life. One evening, I sat on the porch with Mrs. Watkins, sipping chamomile tea and watching the sunset. "You've changed," she said softly, eyes twinkling. "Not just because of the money or the will, but because you finally allowed yourself to matter, to be seen, to be strong." I nodded, thinking of all the years I had spent bending, hiding, enduring. I spent decades thinking I had to earn love from people who would never give it freely, I said. Now I see that love starts with yourself, respect starts with yourself, and revenge, when necessary, starts with patience. It wasn't about cruelty or anger anymore. It was about justice. Poetic, precise, satisfying justice. Watching my children face the consequences of their arrogance had been cathartic. Yes, but the real victory was the reclamation of my life. I started volunteering at the local library and community center, teaching literacy classes and helping those who were overlooked or underestimated. The same people who had once whispered behind my back now sought my advice, my guidance, my wisdom. I had become a quiet legend in my neighborhood, the woman who had endured cruelty and emerged triumphant, unbroken and dignified. On quiet nights, when the house was still, I would sometimes think back to that exact moment in the kitchen when my daughter had smirked, calling me useless. I would close my eyes and remember the tightness in my chest, the tremor in my hands, the surge of suppressed fury. And then I would smile, knowing that moment had been the spark that ignited everything. The best part? The final, undeniable proof that life had shifted in my favor. The day I walked into the lawyer's office for the last signatures, I caught Daniel in the lobby. He looked up, and for the first time, his confident mask faltered. He saw me, the same frail, quiet grandmother? No. He saw Eleanor, poised, radiant, unyielding. And I could read the truth in his eyes. He realized at that moment he had lost everything. And that was the day he realized he'd lost everything. I walked out of the office, my steps light, my head held high. The sun shone through the trees, casting golden light across the path. For decades, I had been invisible, dismissed, underestimated. Now, I was seen, respected, free. And the letters and calls from my parents, who had always supported me quietly from afar, they still come every week. I never answer, not because I've forgotten them, not because I've lost love for them, but because now I am untethered. I am not bound by anyone's expectations or insults. I am Eleanor. I am Grandma. I am whole. The house is quiet, but it's no longer empty. It's filled with warmth, with laughter, with dignity. The roses bloom. The sun rises. Life, after years of betrayal and humiliation, has finally unfolded in its full, beautiful, and just form. I sit by the window now, sipping tea, feeling the wind on my face, watching the world move around me. And in the quiet, I whisper, as I always do, a reminder and a vow to myself. They called me worthless, and I proved them wrong.